Hello, I'm Cynthia Ng. You are tuning in to AWANI Review. Today we are recording from the Mandarin Oriental because I have a very special guest here with me today. Her name is Katrine Marçal. She is an author and a financial journalist, and she's here to speak at the Kazana Mega Trend Forum. But the reason I'll be speaking with her today is I really talk about her book. It's right in my hands. It's titled Mother of Invention: How Good Ideas Get Ignored in a World Built for Men. So this is what we will be talking about later on in the show. Thank you so much, Katrine, to make time for this interview. I know you've been having quite a busy day today.
Thank you so much.
First, can you talk to us about your visit here and your participation at the Kazana Mega Trend Forum?
Well, it's just, I've never been to Malaysia before. I'm Swedish, and I've been invited here to speak about women and innovation, which is my passion topic and which my latest book is about. And it's just been, but it's also been a trip of a lifetime, and just everything has been amazing.
We're very happy to have you here and also to speak about your book. So I've had a chance to read half of it, and I must say it's an eye-opening read, and also I think a lesson in history. You've done so much research into it. Now, if I can summarize just by reading half of the book, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the running thread here is that you underscored why inventions or innovation by women are often underestimated. So I'll allow you to talk more about the book in your words.
Well, the book starts with the story of the rolling suitcase, which is this sort of classic mystery of innovation, because we didn't have wheels on suitcases until 1972, and they were not a big thing until late 1980s, early 1990s. And many people have thought about this, how come that we managed to put 2 men on the moon before somebody came up with the idea to put wheels on suitcases? And I explain why in this book, and it has to do with gender bias, actually. There were wheels on suitcases well before 1972, but it was considered to be a product for women. And it was unthinkable that a man would roll a suitcase. And the luggage industry just didn't take this idea seriously, which is very often the case if an idea is either associated with women or comes from women.
That definition of how we define technology has limited women's opportunity in contributing to growth and the economy. Is that right? Yeah.
So what I say in the book is that our definition of technology has very often followed our definition of masculinity. So my mother was a computer programmer in the early 1980s in Sweden, and back then, computer programming was not really considered to be tech. It was, an extension of administrative work. And the first programmers in the world were women. Women more or less invented software, which people have forgotten about. And I remember when most of my mother's managers were still women, and then I remember it all changing and computer programming becoming, tech and very male, and suddenly got defined as technology. And that's one of the problems when women innovate, or when women are sort of very prominent in a field, we tend to not think of that field as technology. Technology made from soft materials, sewing, ceramics, historically very, very important forms of technology, not considered to be technology, which leads to the exclusion of women from the history of innovation.
And the economic cost that comes with limiting women's participation.
It's an economic waste, right?
Yeah. Can you talk about why it is so important for you to write this book?
Well, firstly, I think it's terrible economic waste. I mean, I know you speak a lot to startup founders and, that part of the economy, the innovation economy, and which is great, and it's the future. But if you look at the innovation economy almost all over the world, it is extremely male dominated. If you look at venture capital funding, in Sweden, where I come from, 99% of all venture capital goes to men. And that's Sweden, a country famous for gender equality. And it's just a terrible economic waste. We are innovating with one hand tied behind our backs when we're not using the potential of women and women's ideas.
And you're bringing up the problem within venture capital funding. I think the figure's pretty much the same everywhere else in the world. 1 to 3% of VC funding goes to women-only companies. And why do you think that is the case? Because we have tried to progress. We have made some, we have moved the needle a bit, but it is so slow.
Yeah. The reason it's so slow is because the way venture capital is structured historically leads to them looking for a particular type of venture to invest in, and which doesn't really fit, that model doesn't really fit the type of businesses and ideas that women tend to have. So venture capital is looking for these ideas that can become either massive or fail completely, get monopolies in their respective markets, or just crash and burn. Women tend to start a different type of companies, and we need a lot of financial innovation. I think we need other types of funding in order to capture that and also make money from it, because it's a huge wasted opportunity. Women influence 80% of all consumer decisions in the global economy. Still 90% of all technological products and services are designed by men. It doesn't make sense. That's a market failure.
Where do you think is that gap? Is it policy? Is it just how the economy is structured? What is it that's really driving this gap?
And particularly the tech sector is so fascinating, because it used to be quite dominated by women. As I said, women were the first programmers in the world. Women more or less invented software. And then in just a couple of decades, it becomes incredibly male dominated. I don't know why, but it tends to be wherever status and money goes, sort of women disappear, and it's frustrating. But also, I think it's in everybody's interest to do something about this.
There is a lot of efforts, I think, in every country to put more women, or to try to elevate women in leadership positions, in hopes that that might help close the gender gap. Has it, though, in your opinion?
Well,
does it help just putting more women?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's not going to hurt you, right? I think but it's not enough. And I do think, I mean, the example of Sweden, which is a country that does, a lot of gender equality policy, and is very ahead in some aspects. But also, the gender pay, we still have a gender pay gap in Sweden. It's, it's sort of an average European level. It's not an easy problem to solve, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do things. But I do think the funding side of it, the fact that women can't get funding for their businesses, is a very big problem, and that could actually be addressed with some financial innovation.
I think this is the same in Malaysia. I interview quite a number. In my program, I do speak to a lot of women entrepreneurs. Funding disparity always comes up as something that is a concern. In your opinion, how can this be changed? We've talked about the problem, and what are your ideas for this?
Well, the funding, it's not just venture capital, it's the whole financial system. It's fascinating. You take two quite different economies. You have Lebanon and the US, so very different. But they do have something in common in the fact that around 1/3 of all small businesses are funded by or run by women in these two countries. And 5% of all business loans, both in Lebanon and in the US, go to women. Only 5%. That says something about this problem that I talk about in the book, is sort of that women are living in the environment of a permanent credit crunch almost, and do not have access to markets and to the opportunities of the economy, at all at the same level as men. And it's just huge waste of talent.
Apart from it being a huge waste, there's also the consequences of not having, like you say, with one hand tied to the back. You are really shutting out half of the population or more into decision making and into solving some of the challenges that we face today. I believe in your session you probably touch on some of the things that we are facing: inflation, climate change, which, if you look at the decision making level, there is still a very unequal representation. How do you think that will affect how we approach to problem solving in critical areas like that? It's if women are not at the table, then half of humanity is not represented, and you're going to miss out on particularly on, I'm very passionate about innovation, and I think this is the paradox. I think most of us intuitively understand that new ideas happen when different perspectives meet. But still, that's not what those rooms look like. And I try to, within the book, use storytelling to just get this message across about how important it is. And I talk about electric cars, for example, are all the rage now. What many people don't know is they existed already in the late 1800s.
And one of the reasons they disappeared was that they were considered to be feminine cars because they were slower, more comfortable. And therefore, you know, they didn't get the same type of investment. Male consumers didn't want them. And we ended up building a whole world for petrol-driven technology, partly because of gender bias, which now obviously, when we look back at it, it was really stupid. And for what reason? Just because we have some random idea that men need to be in a noisy, dangerous car. And I think, and that's what I'm trying to do in the book, is just sort of give these historical examples that hopefully will give people a sense of how important it is to address these things.
Can I go back to the book a bit and just want to understand your process, because there's a lot of research that went into writing this book, you know, digging through historical evidences, and what's the thought process there? How did you start with, you know, taking examples and building a narrative around it? And I must say that it's not a book that is, people might think, based on the title, male bashing. I think it's witty and it's funny and it's enlightening to see that there is, I think the theme here is the underlying missed opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. A missed opportunity, market failure, money to be made for people who sort of address this within their organizations or national economies. So that's, you know, thank you for picking up on that, because that was really what I was trying to do. Well, I mean, I try to be a storyteller, and I try to find these stories that, you know, resonate with people. So hopefully, you know, next time you see a suitcase with wheels, you will think about this, and it will be somewhere in the back of your mind just how much innovation we miss out on.
One of the chapters in your book that I'm at right now, which is the rise of influencer economy, because we talk about technology, internet, social media, and you took Kylie Jenner as an example, the Kardashian family, youngest billionaire at 20, you know, selling her brand of cosmetics. It has opened up an economy, social media, which is largely dominated by women, mothers. Women entrepreneurs, Instagrammers, and how do you see that changing women's participation in the economy? Do you think this is something that might move the needle a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, so I try to really take it seriously, almost as a tech story, because I think it is a tech story. It's interesting that women kind of took roles that are traditionally sort of outside of the formal economy, you know, being a mother, making a home, giving other women advice about what dress to wear, and these sort of things that women have been doing for free for a long time, and monetized it by doing it online. And then also used sort of skills that women are traditionally expected to be good at, which is sort of relationship building. You know, you have your followers, they can become your consumers, but they also have sort of a personal relationship to you. And it's, you know, that type of business model is about building that kind of intimacy online. Which is also skills that, you know, women have been expected to have. So I find it interesting for that reason, you know, that suddenly it can be monetized and it can make you into the youngest self-made billionaire in the world. But then I also say, you know, yes, women are the highest paid influencers on Instagram, but who owns Instagram? It's Facebook, and that's Mark Zuckerberg, and he's not a woman. And if they decide to change the algorithm of these social media platforms, that immediately changes the rules of the game for all of these women. So they're not really, until women own these platforms and have power over the algorithms, they don't really have sort of ultimate economic power.
Well, it's an unfinished business, I think.
Unfinished business, like a lot of things, yes.
Like a lot of things. So I do want to talk about technology as a potential gender equalizing tool, or even maybe even a threat, because if you look at some of the lowest paying jobs in the world, it is still held by women, mostly, more often than not by women. And these other jobs that possibly will be impacted by automation, artificial intelligence. So I do want to get your thoughts about that, and how do you see technology as a tool, as an equalizer, or do you see that how it can be misused?
Yeah. Well, it can be both. It depends on us. And I think I think that's one of the messages of the book, really, is that, we tend to think of technology as this neutral force that's just pushing everything along. And all we do is kind of predict it, sort of how many robots will come, what type of technology will define the economy of the future. But that's not really what technology is. We make the machines, we build them, we fund them, we buy them. And in a sense, so we have much more power over the consequences of technology than we think. It's not like, the weather. So I think with automation, what's interesting from a gender perspective is that in many of the economic studies around what jobs will be likely to be automated in the future, that tends to be more male jobs than female jobs. Because women in most economies specialize more into things like care work, healthcare, even roles within companies that require more sort of emotional relationship intelligence and these sort of things, which the machines are not very good at. So we could come to a situation where actually the robots come for male jobs and women, the parts of the economy where there's still going to be demand for human workers are parts of the economy that we tend to think of as female dominated. And I think that could be an interesting scenario that we don't think about enough. What all of these stories in my book hopefully will make people think about is just, we could do it differently. It's, if in the 1800s, if we hadn't had this idea that a car that's comfortable and quiet needs to be a lady's car, then we might have kept on investing in electric cars much sooner, like 100 years earlier. And the world would have been very, very different. And I think when you read these historic examples, you think, oh, they were so stupid. Of course a man can have a suitcase with wheels. That's a good solution. But I think again and again we come up against, it's so hard for us to challenge these ideas about gender that often it's more important for us to uphold a certain idea about what's male and female than even to make money. And yeah, it's funny.
I know you're writing your third book. Would you be able to give a glimpse of whether there will be the similar running thread in your third book?
Well, it's called A Woman's Worth, so yeah, you can guess for yourself.
Well, looking forward to that. We have about five minutes or so. I do also want to talk about Sweden, especially where you come from. When we look at gender equality, Sweden is one of the countries that we look to and say, hey, this could be a model of success. The top 5 countries that scored really well in gender equality in the Global Gender Gap Report, it is Iceland, Finland, Norway, New Zealand, and Sweden. And 4 out of the 5 countries are led by women, prime ministers. Can you talk about the success stories? And I know you said that a lot of things that need work in your country.
And people don't want to hear that. They want you to come from Sweden and tell, say that everything's wonderful. But I mean, yes, I think it's a fantastic success story. I think there's a lot to learn from it. Sweden invests 4% of GDP into affordable childcare, parental leave, both for mums and for dads. And this leads to a very, very high female employment rate, which means that these systems basically pay for themselves because, yes, you invest a lot of money in providing this, but then through women getting out onto the labor market and paying taxes, it pays for itself. So, and that has been incredibly successful, and I do think that's something for the rest of the world to look to, and I know, the rest of the world is. But then it doesn't solve all your problems, and that's the thing. As I said, Swedish entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, struggled as much or sometimes even more than in other comparable economies. Gender pay gap, still kind of European average, not moving. There are still a lot of problems, and I do think it's so important that the whole discussion that we, compare different countries and what worked in one country and what hasn't worked in another country, because the picture is much more complex than we like to think. There's not one policy. You just copy the Scandinavian model and then everything will work out.
Can I also ask about education? I know you can't speak for Malaysia, but do you feel the education system is doing enough to transform these gender norms and to eliminate some of the bias? For instance, when you talk about women taking up STEM subjects, it's
Yeah.
often said that, oh, women are not cut out for subjects like that because we are not problem-solving people. We do not have an inquisitive mind, which is totally wrong. It's a generalization. Can you talk about your views on that?
No, I think the education system needs to do a lot more, and I think particularly women in STEM, and it's in Sweden and in a lot of other countries right now, the trickiest subject at universities to get women into is computer science, which is so ironic because women were the software pioneers. In Britain in the 60s, they had to have a publicly funded program to get men interested in computing because they were worried that it was just women who were doing programming. And that's the 60s. And then a couple of decades later, it's the reverse. And I saw that change, in my mother, and I'm not that old. So I think, and many people don't even know. Women more or less invented software. The first programmers in the world were women. And I do think the education system needs to do more of what I try to do in my book, which is just put right women back into the history of innovation, because women are there. Women have always innovated and come up with stuff, even though the barriers to that have been much higher than for men. But we're there all throughout. And the problem now is that women, when we study the history of innovation, we are studying our own absence, and that doesn't make you want to go into STEM. And that doesn't make you want to sort of sit in front of these investors and ask for the money for your startup. So, I agree with you. I think a lot of it goes back to education.
You have 3 children.
I do, yeah.
What kind of conversation do you have with them, regarding, do you tell them your ideas? Do you share your book, your thoughts with them?
We try our best as parents. I don't try to brainwash them. And I think, the rule of parenting is children don't do what you tell them to do, they do what you do. So I try to be a role model both to my son and my girls in the best possible way, and I fail every day, and then I try again, and it's all about the building I think a strong relationship with them as humans, and being open with who you are. And I don't know, I think they think I write books about money and robots, sort of, which is
to a certain extent it is true. Yeah. Well, just a couple of minutes left. I want to get your thoughts about leadership. There's a perception that men and women bring different values to the table. Do you agree on that?
Yes and no. I think it's something unfair when we have this, when the whole discourse around getting women into leadership is that, the point of getting a woman into a leadership position is so she can fix a mess created by a man. Because I think that's very often the case. It's sort of, women are often brought into political office after, or even we saw after the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, suddenly women were advancing in finance, right? So, and I think that's a bit unfair to women, that our job is somehow to just clean up after the boys. So I do think it's very, very important to have women into leadership positions, and as research shows, it's very important to get to that 30%. When you get to 30% women, you will have that sort of change of culture that is necessary for more inclusivity and diversity. So when the great global pandemic hit, initially there was this narrative that female leaders did much better, and there were some numbers supporting that. But then when you looked a year later, the picture was different, because it wasn't that women had some inherent, when you're sick, mummy will look after you thing. It's, it's very difficult leading a country through a pandemic, and it's very important with diverse leadership. But I don't think there is anything sort of inherent with, just because you're a woman, you are particularly good at this or that. I think there's much more. The picture, again, is more complicated.
I think the reason why I asked, because then that kind of, if you have that perception, it kind of perpetuates the gender bias that, hey, we are only good in certain things, and the rest, leave it to the other gender.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is often that, when people look for a visionary leader, they will think man, right? And when they look for a leader who can clean up a mess, they look for a woman. And that, as you say, that just, that's bias as well.
Yeah, but I think the key here, probably diversity, and just having more different voices, be it gender, be it race, be it economic background. I think that, well, personally, I think that should be the conversation.
And particularly if you want innovation, I think that's one of the lowest hanging fruit. You know, if you have, and the research is very clear that more diverse teams. There's even interesting studies about how leaders who make sure that in meetings women and men speak the same amount of time create more innovative groups. Or even more interestingly, I think, leaders who showed in front of a whole group that they were prepared to change direction based on the input from a woman created a more innovative group as a whole. So there are all of these wins to it.
Last question. What advice do you have for aspiring writers?
Just write. I think it's write and read. Often people, the thing that's going to make you a better writer is reading. But then also just, it's a craft. I think people have a very romanticized view of writing. But it's not about sort of sitting around waiting for inspiration. So much of it is craft and getting good at just doing the job and sort of showing up. So just keep going, and maybe don't think too much. Just
keep at it.
Keep at it. Yeah.
Start and keep at it.
Start and keep at it. Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm really looking forward to your next book. I'm waiting to finish this. I'm just trying to savor the moment and just read it slowly. Thank you so much, Katrine, for spending time with me and just talking about the issues in the world and your book as well. And best of luck with it to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.